Well, I think when things get really bad in the fall, it's an opportunity to mobilize people. Because if you have 1 million people showing up in DC, they're going to listen. People
Yeah.
are going to. I mean, there might hopefully. I mean, it could devolve into something worse. But I mean, you could if you mobilize people around the country and you have these mass movements and people are demanding this, then I think it's going to be. Right now it's kind of like, yeah, well, politicians saying we'll give people lip service, but we're actually just going to
Yeah.
do what we're going to do, and we'll give them a few crumbs, but we're not really going to, we're going to lower the Social Security age, to 55 or something or whatever. They're not really going to do anything radical. But I think if people are mobilized around the country and doing this and saying this is what we want, and this is where maybe where Movement for a People's Party fits in, because you got to have some kind of a program of this is what our demands are. You know, um,
Well, so again, let me just like talk about that really quickly. So, Movement for People's Party does have an action today where they're going around the country. They're doing the same thing. They're going to representatives' houses and they're saying, "We need a people stimulus. We're about to have millions of people thrown out on the street." And what I've been backing that up with online is basically saying, and now that we know where you live, you know, these we're going to have tent cities in your neighborhood when these people are kicked out. That's how we're going to solve the problem if you won't solve it now, right? That's what I'm saying. But they're asked, but they have a list of demands. But the biggest one, of course, is a people stimulus. We need some. If you're going to, if jobs are taken away, people need some kind of financial support. So at least that's going on right now.
but I mean, I think that's really good. But it seems to me
Yeah,
like it's too tepid. Like why not go and say we want to like Jeff Bezos made whatever how many billions of dollars he made in one day. 15
right.
billion dollars in one day. That's obscene. Like we need to have justice. We need to have equity through a fair system of taxation. I mean, because what we have now is a joke. When you have the top person has more wealth than whatever the bottom swath of the population. That's just not. That's so it's great to
We're
get a
we're
stimulus,
so
but that
far we're so far away from that right now between our COVID situation and our protest situation, right? That we're trying to scrape back to get to the horrible inequity of a decade ago, let alone
well,
let
I think
alone. But
I really think you got
yeah,
to go beyond that and say this is, and you got to keep it simple. Say like these are our 3 or 5 or 10 points. This is what we want, and this
right.
is what it's going to look like when we get that. When we get that, this means when you get sick, you go to the doctor, and you don't have to worry about showing in kind of a card. Like you just get sick, you go to the doctor. Like in
Yeah.
most civilized countries,
Okay,
right?
so okay, so Jim, did you have any sort of update on what the MPP is like? Because I know that you told us to get on the call on Thursday. Was there an update with that?
Well, no, so it's just about they were just organizing for the car caravan and rally today at Congress people's houses, where they're essentially going to be presenting the list of demands, which are along the line of defunding police and people stimulus, Medicare for all, free public college and quality education, uh, environmental actions. So basically, they have like a list of things. I think the primary at this point, the emergency is a people stimulus because people are about to lose their
Right, right.
they're about to lose their not make rent, lose their houses and all that.
And then what do you have any information on that Unity ticket, the one with Yang and
I don't have anything on that, and
okay.
I think they're trying to draft Yang. I don't think he's like quote unquote on the ticket.
Yeah,
Uh,
because I was gonna say I actually saw an interview that he actually went
yeah,
on the Karen Hunter show and he talked about how that his main goal right now is to get Biden elected. So I
yeah,
thought that was
right.
very
And
weird
and
how he's
he's
supposedly working for this, but
he's asking his supporters to financially support the Biden campaign and so forth. So yeah, I don't see that happen with that. This is more that Professor Brett Weinstein came up with this framework that basically defeats the argument, the Jill Stein, Ralph Nader argument. Basically, what happens is you get people together and they're not tightly, they're not Democrats, Republicans. They're basically just running as in the centrists almost. And if it gets to the point that that they would be a spoiler. Essentially, the plug is like automatically pulled on that campaign. So they run along, and at some point, I don't forget exactly how it works, but if they're not making at least 25% or whatever at this point in the campaign, then they just don't run anymore to be the spoiler, basically. So he kind of like built in this automatic mechanism that defeats the argument of, you can't run third party, you can't run a centrist party because it'll cause this problem.
Well,
Which
I think it's really
which is
interesting.
genius, which is wonderful.
Yeah, I think it's a really interesting idea.
It's a new idea, and maybe next time it can actually happen.
I mean, the idea of having two centrists, center left and center right, as opposed to having a Ralph Nader, or having a Strom Thurmond or something, like, you're having people in the middle, so they can actually draw from both sides, right?
Mm-hmm.
And this idea that the populism, that a lot of people are disillusioned with the swamp or with the current system, so that this kind of idea of a alternative party would hold a lot more, would be a lot more attractive for a larger number of people than in the past. So, like, potentially you could get a lot of people supporting it. My question is, how do you actually logistically make it happen? For
I just want to say real quick, though,
an
important part of that too is you remind me is that they essentially govern as like co-presidents almost, right? The vice president isn't someone that just does signing, ceremonies or something like that. It's a shared power idea, so that you don't say, well, yeah, but the guy on the right is the president and our guy's no, it's not really like that.
But they flip a coin, is that correct? Is that how they do it?
I forget how it's done.
Okay, because but constitutionally, obviously one person is going to be the president, and that person is going to have all the power. Technically, whether they agree to divide it up is one thing, but ultimately it's the vice president's not going to, it's a bucket of warm spit, whoever said that. I mean, there's no power really that the vice president has. The president's going to have all the power.
If he breaks the agreement, if he breaks the terms of this contract and this agreement, he could probably do that.
And logistically speaking, are they on the ballot? Like, can they get even on the ballot? How would that work for them to actually be like a viable thing? Because they are trying to run for this year, right?
So my feelings is I'm watching for it to develop in the future. I just don't. It hasn't caught fire in the way it would have had to have, in my opinion, for it to happen this year. I haven't followed it that closely. I mean, obviously the media is going to try not to cover it, but we would hear about it in the alternate media. Jimmy Dore would be talking about it. Combo Couch, Kim Iverson, all these great folks would be talking about it. If it, I want to kick also Israel.
Big Talk, Little Talk.
Big Talk, Little Talk. All these wonderful people out there would be talking about it if it was happening.
How would they distinguish themselves, like in their program, from like the Democrats or Republicans? What would be distinguishing them?
So I think essentially the idea is, again, I haven't looked into it a whole lot, but I just think the idea is that you're taking people from the center. So they're not going to be as focused on identity politics on the one hand, and religious, which the two can be the same, religious items on the other hand. They're going to be hopefully dealing with infrastructure and support for people and all, that we need.
I mean, one would hope.
That's my hope.
One would hope, but I mean, you could say that the two parties as they exist now would both become center parties, because they're basically, the Democrats are just ever so slightly to the left of the Republicans, and it's they mostly have focused on identity politics because that's, it's cheap, right? It doesn't cost anything, but they're not dealing with a real infrastructure, equity issues. So would this center?
I think both the fact that they were talking about it being like Yang and Admiral McRaven, I believe,
right,
are both known as essentially independents. These aren't people that are slaves to the Democrat or Republican Party. I think the idea is that you don't bring in all the corporate warmonger elements that that are built into the Republicans and Democrats.
I mean,
I think that's the idea.
Just Trump trying to pull troops out of Afghanistan, which is like, It's like the
Oh,
clock being right twice a day, a broken clock being right
right.
twice a day. I mean, he's doing the
Well,
right thing, but like
yeah.
they all grouped up against and said, you can't do this. You know, I mean,
Or
Lincoln.
again, Trump is a horrific authoritarian, but the Dems just voted to block a reduction of 10%, which we've given since Trump has been president.
Right,
The military budget has increased more than 10%.
right.
They won't even roll it back that tiny bit to 10%. Um, I don't know. I don't know how people think about it. I just
Because
it's
that's who they
crazy,
work for. I mean, that's who they
flabbergasting.
work for. They
Yeah.
don't work for the people. They work for their.
Well, I think what the real thought is that they're, they want all these authoritarian laws and military abilities, so that when Trump, who is the aberration, who's the one non duopoly member, once they get in, either the Republicans or Democrats are going to go back to war and are going to, and all that. It just caught them by surprise that somebody kind of an outsider like Trump came in and took advantage of these authoritarian abilities that they wanted in their back pocket to use against the Americans if they ever did rebel against the tyranny of their rule, but they didn't expect to in a few decades anyway.
Do you think we're going to go back to, like, if Biden wins? Do you think we're going to go back to the status quo ante of basically having these foreign wars and trying to go against the Russians and Afghanistan and trying to control the Middle East and everything? You think we're going to just go back to that?
Oh yeah, I would bet. I'd bet you $100 that within 6 months we would be at least bombing new territories that we're not bombing now, if not actually having troops in. I mean, he's got so many places that he would like to flex that military muscle.
And are people going to go back to sleep? I mean, that's the question.
Well, luckily on Twitter there are a whole bunch of mostly former Tulsi people that are all saying, they're all rallying around, we cannot, anti-war movement cannot go back to sleep if Biden gets in. And the thinking on that thread was essentially, we think Biden's going to get in, and we can't let anti-war go back to sleep when that happens.
Okay.